So today we're here with Sonia Thimmiah, who's the head of sustainability at Heineken. Please tell us, what do you do at COP27 and what's your engagement?
Thank you so much, Chris. Really delighted to be here talking to you. So COP27 for us is really important because as business, we really need to lend our voice to the urgent action that's needed on climate. And there's two things in particular. One, we have to see the right actions to keep 1.5 degrees alive. That's about the NDCs having the right emission reduction trajectory to really make sure that we hit that target. And secondly, also to say we really need that investment. That's been promised since 2015. So the 100 billion by 2020 really does need to start flowing and flowing in the right areas to enable a just transition. From a business perspective, we come here to lend our voices to the policymakers who are in the details of the negotiation to say that's what we'd like to see, but we're also here as part of the solution to say we are part of the action that's needed to deliver. For example, in Heineken, we're committed to delivering net zero across Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030, which when you have over 170 breweries in 70 countries is a really serious commitment.
But maybe Heineken as a brewery also has maybe even a bigger part in the adaptation. What kind of water stewardship work do you do in regards to that, to make communities more water resilient?
We have a huge role to play when it comes to adaptation. So for us, especially for those sites that are in water stressed areas, it's really important that we understand where is it going to go in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. We also need to look at those sites that may not be water stressed now, but in 10 years will be, and say what are the actions we can start taking now to help that adaptation happen. What do we do now, but what do we do in the future to build our climate resilience?
How is supply chain legislation impacting you from a water perspective?
So it's an interesting one on supply chain. So supply chains for us are really critical. So for example, if you look at our agriculture supply chain, what happens in terms of water, which we've been talking about, is hugely important. So for us, where we source barley and hops, really understanding what's going to happen in terms of water availability. Now barley doesn't tend to be particularly water hungry, but it will be impacted by climate change. So how do we look at that, and how do we support the farmers who work on those commodities to really be resilient for the future? You mentioned regulation, and full transparency, it's not so much a supply chain regulation that's affecting us because a lot of that we're compliant with. I think it's more about having that forward-looking view about how do we support our supply chains to also transition to net zero. So let me give you one example. We recently brought together 25 of our biggest cooling suppliers. So refrigeration for beers is a really important deal, but it has a carbon footprint. So we're now working with them to say, how can we help them set science-based targets? What technologies can we develop to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So for us, it's not so much about the regulation, it's much more about how do we support our supply chains transition to net zero as well.
Right. Do you engage with communities, or is it more of a top-down kind of approach?
Yeah, so it's such a good question. Heineken's not very top-down. It tends to be much more about bringing people along with the journey. Yes, we did come out with a new set of ambitions and targets last year, which we called Brew a Better World. And it looks at not just environmental, but what do we do around social responsibility as well. Secondly, it's also about, especially, I'm going to keep going back to water as a theme that we've been talking about. For us, it's about how do we drive collective action with different partners in the breweries, but outside as well, to really look at the watersheds where we operate and the communities within them to see what are their needs, how do we help them, what is it that we can all do collectively to improve, in this case, water availability, water quality, water access in very, very immediate terms.
Do you have a concrete example in mind? Let's say you have a brewery in whatever basin, do you then go there and replenish an aquifer? Do you build sanitation facilities, or what does it look like?
So in Indonesia, in the area where we operate, we noticed that because of population growth in the area, it really led to deterioration in the environment. For example, in terms of water quality, but also a real loss of forest. Only 37% of the original forest was left standing. So working with UNIDO and the local community and NGOs, we started a program around reforestation, as well as bamboo cultivation. This had the added benefit of improving the water quality. Obviously the reforestation improved the quality there, but also it started deterring illegal logging that was happening in the area. Plus, it provided an income stream for people, and that's really important. I really want us not to think about environmental issues in isolation, to think about people who should really be at the heart of the solutions that we have. And then once we started that, we realized that's not enough. We need to do a lot more if we're really going to protect the watersheds, the catchments within which we work. So we then started working in a coalition with Coca-Cola, with Nestle, Danone, and many others, as well as this is facilitated through a group called the Global Water Partnerships in Southeast Asia, as well as Alliance for Water in Indonesia. So as you can tell, it's about bringing lots of different actors together to say, what are the practical actions that we can take from a technological perspective, from a behavior change perspective, to really make sure that we're preserving the water in the watershed, and we're promoting for the long term. The actions that we take, if we're really going to make it stick, and if it's going to be sustainable, these are multi-year efforts that we need to get into. So that's one example of the kinds of things that we did just there in Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean, reforestation, afforestation is the perfect example of also ticking the box of mitigation and adaptation of climate change, right? So
absolutely. And you know what happened is it improved the water quality, but it also reduced flooding. So we talk about adaptation, and the problem with water is in some places you have too much, in some places you have too little. So we do need to think about this as a joint-up solution, about not how do we just tackle one problem, but really understanding what are the issues holistically that we can tackle, and to do it with others who have a similar interest, knowledge and capabilities as well.
Thank you so much. Last question. What is your objective with COP27?
On a personal level, I come here to learn, to share, and to understand what can I take back in terms of connections, in terms of people, in terms of relationships. But the big job for COP27, which we have to remember, is what the negotiators do, the hard work the negotiators do from different governments. And there it's about getting the right text to align on the path ahead of the global stocktake that we're going to see in COP28. And what I would really like to see is that we do keep 1.5 alive. We get the commitment from countries to do it, and we get commitment on investment as well, to focus on adaptation, as you mentioned, not just mitigation, all in support of the just transition.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Really nice to talk to you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
In one word,
Yeah.
COP27 for you?
Hopeful. Thank you so much.